So I've already explained to you guys that I made a drop spindle when I was home a lot. We lived in the city still. I didn't have any money and I wanted to spin. So this is how I made it. I used a coaster and just cut it at the bottom, put in a dowel, and then I hot glued it. Put a little hook in the top. Now the balance on this is very wobbly. It wobbles like this when I spin with it. So today I'm going to show you how to build one. I think it probably costs $1 to make this. I already had a CD, DVD, and so these are all the things that are required. I'm going to use hot glue, but you could use super glue if you don't have a hot glue gun. So what I did is I took a dowel. This is a 5/16 dowel, and I cut it 12 inches long. When I did that, I just used a kitchen knife, a serrated kitchen knife, and I just squirted around the outside and then cut a little harder. Here's a washer and a grommet. It's a rubber grommet. This was the most expensive part. It was like 95 cents. And this is a 5/16 grommet. So I think I'm going to tilt my camera down just a bit. So I'm going to estimate about a foot on my 5/16 dowel. Okay? I'm going to use my serrated kitchen knife to score my dowel. Then I'm just going to cut it all the way through, turning it every once in a while because that way you won't get any breakage or jagged edges. Aside. I still got a little bit of breakage, but it doesn't really matter. Put the knife aside. Now I'm going to take my grommet, my rubber grommet. I found this in the hardware section. They have these in the electrical aisle too, but they only had an assorted pack there. So again, a 5/16 grommet. And I'm going to take my big washer and put the grommet inside the washer, making sure that it's not cut up on anything, kind of pulling the lip out a little bit, making sure that it looks nice and round, which it does. Okay, so then I put it inside and I'm going to twist the dowel. If I try to just push the dowel in, it'll make the grommet fold. So rather than pushing it in, I twist it in. That's what it looks like. Then I take my DVD, CD, whatever it happens to be, and put it over the top so that the hole fits in really nice. And then so now that I see it would fit, I take my super glue or my hot glue and run it along the top, put this on, and then press it and move it around just a little bit and look at the top, make sure that all the space is even between, because it doesn't fit snug. There's some give there about where the grommet is going to fit compared to the CD, and you want it to be centered. Okay, so depending on which way you put it, you can use this as a top whorl or a bottom whorl. It doesn't really matter. You can use it for both. And so what I did was I ran a thin line of not super glue, I used like hot glue, a thin line of hot glue there around the grommet, and centered everything, so it should work pretty good. If you want to put a little hook in it, you just get a little hardware hook and just it should just screw right in without having to pre-drill a hole. But if you pre-drill a hole, just make it a really teeny tiny hole. I guess you could have a problem with it splitting, but you don't need a hook on. So here I'm going to use it as a bottom whirl, and I'll just show you. So I tie my thread at the bottom. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Turn it upside. Now this is the part that you got to watch. So see that? So you don't need a hook. Try and make sure you guys can see this. I connect my wool. Make sure it has some good space to catch hold. See that? Take your rest of your wool, wrap it up around your arm. If you want to be able to adjust this to farther down or farther up, you can do that. The reason I like the washer on it is because it adds some weight. It's nicer to have a slightly heavier spindle. When you're first starting out, because it doesn't wobble as much. If it does wobble a lot, just keep your thumb on it like that. As it spins, keep your thumb on it and it'll keep it from wiggling too much. So you've spun some yarn. You're going to unhook it, roll it up on the bottom, and then loop it again. If this was just a little bit heavier, it wouldn't wobble so much. So if you wanted to add a couple grommets to it, that might not, or not grommets, washers to it, that wouldn't be a bad idea. So if you wanted to use it as a top whirl, so I didn't like the balance on the last one very well. So on this one, I took a line of super glue or hot glue around the grommet, and then at the top between the grommet and the dowel on both sides. And now instead of using one CD, I'm going to put, I want it to be heavier. So now I'm going to put one on the top and one on the bottom. And mush them together like that. And that way I want to see if it spins better. Okay, so again, I'm going to try it. I think it's easiest to do it as a bottom whirl for a beginner. So I'm going to start it on the bottom. Again, do my little, it's like, I think it's a half hitch is what you call it. Okay. Lap it a little bit. Ah, so much better. Look, that's exactly what you want it to be like. You want it to be heavy enough that it's not spinning out of control on you. That is as good as it needs to be for a homemade spindle. Okay, so I'm going to unhook it, roll it on the bottom, Make it shorter so it's a little more manageable. Loop it over. Put this over the top. And start spinning. Again, you could turn this over and turn it into a top whirl. You can do that, and that wouldn't be a problem. And start with a thick yarn. Don't try to make something really thin while you're still trying to figure out what you're doing. And you'll pick up the way that you want to do it. You don't have to do it the way that I do it. You'll just, eventually it'll be muscle memory, and you'll just pick up the way that you want to do it and the thickness that you like and which kind of fibers you like. I find it easier to drop spindle while I'm standing, but it's hard for me to show that while I'm sitting and giving a tutorial. So there you go. If you want to buy a spindle, I like a Turkish spindle. Those are the ones that I really like. Paige has a spindle-in, of course, and that's good for just teaching basic plying, but I wouldn't stick with a spindle-in because you don't learn about how to test the strength of your fiber if you have a supported spindle versus a drop spindle. And it was also $30, I think, for the spindle-in. And it's hard to do production spinning with that because the bobbin is small. And it pretty much is going to always be thin because the bobbin is small, it's not heavy. So if you want to learn how to spin really well before you invest in a spinning wheel, use a drop spindle. It teaches you how to spin. It teaches you how to have a strong thread. And it's something super fun. You can take it as you're crafting in a bus. I mean, you see, I would be in my own personal space and still be able to do this without being obnoxious to other people. I've actually done it in church before, which is probably not very appropriate, but I have a hard time sitting still in church, and so if I don't bring spinning or knitting or something to church, I have a hard time sitting still and listening. The further down this knot is, the more it's going to warble because it's going to cant it to the side. So if you're having a problem with it warbling a lot, put a hook in, and that'll take a lot of the warble out. In fact, here, I've got 2 hooks in this one. I'll show you the difference. So I always like to have something to do with my hands. It drives me crazy not to have something in my hands. And so, yeah, I take it to church with me. Which, yeah, I get some weird looks. But hey, I'm at church, so does it matter? I don't know. Maybe it does. But honestly, I wouldn't mind a child knitting in church or coloring if they really felt like they needed to. I taught a teen class in Sunday school, and it drove me crazy because they couldn't sit still and listen. And the thing is, I totally understand because I have a hard time sitting in Sunday school if I don't have something to do with my hands. So I'd rather the kids were doing something like that and listening as opposed to wiggling or just totally tuning me out. Okay, so with the hook, you just hook it twice, make sure it's on there good. If you don't hook it twice, it has a tendency not to hold on very well. So, see how nice that spins now? There's no warble at all. And so, if you're just learning, you might feel more secure with a hook on the end. So now it's making me a liar. It's warbling. But it doesn't come off the hook. And if you tie the knot in a way that isn't quite right, it will come off the knot. So it's just kind of up to you. And I used this for 3 or 4 years. And then I got my other drop spindle and my Navajo spindle, and that was fun. But I decided that I wanted to be faster, that I couldn't keep up with my knitting needs, and so that's when I went and got a spinning wheel. And I love to make gloves and hats and stuff for Christmas presents. Just be aware that if you do all your spinning and carding and knitting and everything, and then you ever see that article of clothing on the floor, you're probably going to turn into Zool and have a hissy fit, because it's a work of art. It literally is a work of art. It was your creativity and your work and your imagination that made that object. And so just be aware of that, and try not to be a crazy person when you see people not respecting and taking care of what you've given them. And just make a note, and in the future, don't make stuff for people that it would hurt your relationship for you to be frustrated with them because they're not appreciating what you made for them. I had to do that with Mr. Dirt. When we first got married, I was making him all sorts of socks and gloves and hats and stuff, and he wouldn't wear them. For one thing, he hates to wear hats, and he doesn't wear gloves either. And so be kind and be observant in your choice of gifting to people. Make sure that you're not gifting in a way that's about you rather than about them. And gift to people that love this kind of thing rather than to people where they're going to feel guilty because they'd never use it. But you can see that it's really fun. It's a quiet activity. You get a lot of looks and you get a lot of conversation out of it. And it makes those quiet times when you don't really have anything else to do, but you feel like you'd like to be doing something. It's one of those things that just kind of whiles away the hour, and you have something to show for it at the end of the day, which is nice. Eventually, your bobbin, which is the thing at the bottom, that bobbin will fill up and you'll pull it off. Or there's some really neat lazy Kates. A lazy Kate is a bobbin holder that allows you to pull off string slowly so that you can ply it without having to unwind it into a ball first, and those are very convenient. If you go to my Pinterest page, I think that I have it under projects to try. And it's pretty neat. Some people get really imaginative with those lazy Kates. But you should be able to find it on Pinterest under drop spindle lazy Kate. And I don't have one because I don't drop spindle as much as I used to. When I was milking a lot of goats, my hands started to bother me a lot. And that's one of the other reasons I had to switch to a spinning wheel instead of a spindle. You can see how much movement there is in my hand as I'm working the spindle. And I had to cut back on that until I cut back on goats and could be a little more careful of my wrists. You can see it actually moves really fast. And again, don't be frustrated if it takes you time to figure out the drawing technique. It's all about how you pull that fiber out of your roll lag. This is your roll lag. But if you want to be an excellent spinner on a spinning wheel or anything else, use a drop spindle to learn, because your string will be so flippin' strong because it has to hold that heavy spindle. And if it can't hold that heavy spindle, your string breaks, and it shows you that you have slubs and you have weak points, and you need to work on your technique. And you can listen to audiobooks while you're doing this. And what else do I do while I'm doing this? You can look at the internet while you're doing this, so you feel like you've got something else going on. All for $1. And in my neck of the wood, I can get wool from PJ Hartwell, Hartwell, Hartwell. and they are in Rigby, and they have a little sheep farm and they card their own wool. I will say that I prefer to card my own wool as opposed to a local producer, because they have a tendency to use a carding drum, and carding drums will roll wool back on itself so that you have lots of slubs. And even for machine carding, I much prefer to card my own wool. My quality of my Rolags is so much better than what I can get online or from anybody else, with the exception of maybe merino. I've had really good luck with merino. It doesn't slub as much, and I'm used to doing a knot. Loop it. And so you can go online. I love to use merino. It's soft on your hands, and people have a tendency, if you have a sensitivity to wool, then merino is a good wool for those who are allergic to wool or have problems with wool. I'm a little bit sensitive to wool, just a little bit, but this last batch I got so very clean and did such a good job keeping it clean that I actually haven't had any problem with this. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of wool has manure left in it and it's dirty, so really clean wool makes a difference. Also, something that helps is to have a little bit of oil on your hands, unless you're spinning in the grease, which is if you didn't wash your wool because it was really clean, then that's called spinning in the grease, which means you don't need to put any kind of oil or lubricant on your hands. But if your wool is really clean and stiff, put a little bit of almond oil on your hands before you start, and you can put a little essential oils on your hands too, and that's fun. The scent won't last very long in your wool, but it smells nice when you're doing it. And grease your hands up just a little bit, and it'll make your wool move through your fingers better. So I'm going to show you how to do a drop, or a top whirl. Let's see if I can do it. I might have too much wool on my top now. So there it is, spinning on the top, and that means you just have a longer bobbin to work with than the bottom. It just depends on how you like to balance your wool. If you prefer the feel of a drop spindle, then don't do it this way, or of a bottom whirl. It's just totally personal taste, but you can just choose. So if it was a top whirl, you would load it underneath on the bottom like that. So these are really versatile. And if you don't have $1, get a stick that's straight, like a chopstick, stick it in a potato, half of a potato. Or do what I do and go get a wood coaster and drill a hole in the middle, and it won't matter that it wobbles. It'll be your own, and it just won't matter.